Snow in Bozeman falls with a heavy, suffocating silence that seems to erase every trace of the life my father spent 40 years building on this rugged Montana earth. My name is Felicity Vance. Pull my truck into the familiar gravel driveway of our modern ranch estate, my 30-year-old hands trembling slightly against the steering wheel as the massive timber-framed house looms through the white haze. The scent of pine and expensive wood smoke drifts from the chimney, but there is no warmth waiting for me inside these walls. I step into the grand dining hall where 20 guests are already seated around a long, polished walnut table gleaming with silver and crystal. My sister Miranda Vance, looking radiant in a silk dress that cost more than a month's worth of cattle feed, doesn't even stand up to greet me. She leans back in the seat that used to be my father's, a cruel smirk dancing on her lips as she gestures toward the back door. "Oh, Felicity, you're late. And as you can see, the table is full of people who actually contribute to this family's status. So I guess your plate's outside with the dogs, where you belong," she says, her voice dripping with a casual malice that makes the room go cold. My mother Lydia stares at her wine glass, refusing to meet my eyes while the guests exchange uncomfortable glances. I don't argue or cry. Instead, I walk forward with a measured calm that seems to unnerve Miranda. I place a small weathered silver box, the one Dad gave me before his final breath, directly in the center of the table. "Enjoy your meal, Miranda," I whisper, leaning down so only she can hear the edge in my voice. "But check under your plate after dessert because Dad left a little surprise for everyone who thinks they've already won." Before we continue with my story, I want to ask, what time is it right now, where you are, and which city are you watching from? I'd love to know how far my journey has traveled. If you enjoy stories of justice and family drama, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below to help us grow. Now let's get back to the night everything changed. Growing up in the shadow of the Bridger Mountains, I learned early on that being the younger daughter meant being the invisible one. My sister Miranda was always the golden child, the one our mother Lydia paraded around Bozeman like a trophy at every local charity gala, while I was the one in stained denim helping Dad mend fences or check the irrigation lines in the biting wind that swept across the valley. The disparity wasn't just in chores. It was in the way the air in the house seemed to thin whenever I entered a room, as if my presence were an inconvenience to the perfect, sophisticated image Miranda worked so hard to maintain for her social circle. Mother never saw the blisters on my hands or the frostbite on my ears from working the winter shifts. She only saw the dirt under my fingernails and frequently reminded me that a girl of my standing should be more like her sister, who was busy climbing the social and academic ladders of Seattle. In those years, the dining table was a battlefield of subtle snubs, where I was consistently seated at the very end, furthest from the conversation, and the affection often feeling like a stranger in my own home. Miranda had a predatory way of twisting my father's quiet nature into an endorsement of her superiority, frequently laughing at dinner parties about how I was biologically suited for the barn rather than the boardroom. I remember one specific Thanksgiving when I had spent 12 grueling hours helping our ranch hands rescue a dozen calves trapped in a sudden blizzard, only to come home and find that my place setting had been moved to a small, rickety side table in the kitchen because Miranda's new friends from the city needed more breathing room in the main hall. The smell of expensive perfume and city gossip wafted into the kitchen, while I ate my cold turkey alone, listening to them joke about the help outside. Dad saw it all, his eyes heavy with a tired kind of wisdom and a silent regret that he couldn't bridge the gap between his two daughters, but he remained a man of few words often, just placing a calloused hand on my shoulder when we were alone in the barn. Those quiet moments smelling of hay and leather were the only thing that kept me from walking away from the Vance legacy entirely. Miranda's arrogance grew with every year she spent away at university, funded entirely by the sweat and physical labor I put into this land, Yet she returned for holidays, acting as though she were the rightful queen of a kingdom she had never lifted a finger to build or protect. She spoke of the ranch not as a home or a living, breathing heritage, but as a cumbersome asset to be liquidated for her own metropolitan ambitions the moment Dad was gone. I watched as she meticulously manipulated Mother into believing that I was a burden, a simple-minded girl who would never understand the complexities of luxury or business. Little did she know, the complexity I was learning out in the pastures was the kind that involved loyalty, grit, and a deep intuitive understanding of my father's true intentions for the Vance name, while her complexity was nothing more than a house of cards, built on vanity and greed. 5 years ago, the sky over Bozeman seemed to turn a darker, more ominous shade of gray when the first signs of the financial crisis hit the ranching industry, and Dad's health began to fail simultaneously. While the cattle prices plummeted and the bank started sending increasingly urgent notices about the outstanding loans on our equipment, Miranda was nowhere to be found, claiming her life in the city was far too demanding and fragile to deal with what she called depressing rural problems. I was 30 then, but I felt 60 as I took over the crushing management of the ranch, navigating the complex web of debts and declining production, while also becoming Dad's primary medical caregiver and emotional anchor. Every morning started at 4 with the livestock breaking the ice in the troughs and ended at midnight by Dad's bedside administering medication and reading him the complex ledgers so he knew the land was still ours. I watched the strength leave his massive hands, the hands that had taught me how to ride and respect the earth, and in those quiet, painful months of his decline, we spoke more than we ever had in my entire life. He told me things about the family finances that Mother didn't even have the courage to hear, explaining how Miranda had been secretly calling him for years, sobbing for massive sums of money to cover her failing boutique business and extravagant lifestyle. When Miranda did deign to visit, it was never to offer comfort. She would swan into the house draped in cashmere, complain about the smell of medicine and manure, and spend her time eyeing the antique silver and Dad's collection of vintage firearms like an appraiser. I remember a horrific afternoon in the sterile hospital hallway where she cornered me, her face flushed with a terrifying greed, demanding to know if I had convinced Dad to sign over the management of the estate to her, yet because she had contacts in real estate. He's still alive and fighting Miranda, try to show an ounce of human respect. I had told her, my voice shaking with a mixture of bone-deep exhaustion and cold fury. She just laughed, a hollow metallic sound that echoed through the corridor, and told me that my loyal martyr act wouldn't get me a single acre once the lawyers and the probate court got involved. Mother Lydia unfortunately retreated into a shell of complete denial, siding with Miranda because she couldn't face the reality of Dad's terminal diagnosis or the fact that our family was rotting from the inside out. During one of the rare moments Dad was lucid and unusually strong, he asked me to fetch his old lawyer, Mr. Sterling, for a private meeting that lasted several hours while I stood guard outside the study like a sentinel. Miranda tried to barge in 3 times, claiming she was the rightful elder child and had a right to be part of any legacy discussions, but for the first time in years, the ranch hands stood their ground and blocked her path. I saw the look on her face then, a venomous mix of entitlement and budding hatred, and I knew she would never forgive me for being the only person Dad actually trusted with the truth in his final days. For long years, I poured every single cent of my personal savings into the ranch, selling my own truck, and even some of my late grandmother's heirloom jewelry just to keep the payroll for the loyal ranch hands steady. I didn't tell Mother or Miranda because I knew they would see it as a sign of weakness, or worse, an opportunity to demand more for their own selfish desires. Miranda had married Julian by then, a man whose charm was as thin as his bank account, and whose eyes were always searching for the quickest way to turn a profit. Together, they began circling the estate like vultures, waiting for a carcass to stop moving, making plans for a future that didn't include the land or the people on it. They lived in a high-rise in Seattle but sent constant condescending emails to Mother about how the Vance legacy needed a modern, profitable touch, which was just code for selling the North Pasture to luxury developers. While I was knee-deep in the mud, literally birthing calves in the middle of a freezing March night with only a flashlight and my own determination, Julian was at the City Country Club telling anyone who would listen that he was basically running the show from afar. Nobody in the family acknowledged that I was the one who had negotiated the new grazing leases or spent weekends fixing the irrigation system that had been failing for a decade because we couldn't afford contractors. Even Lydia, my own mother, began to treat me like a glorified foreman rather than her own daughter, often asking me to use the service entrance or stay in the mudroom when I came in for dinner because important socialites were coming over. I remember a particularly bitter evening when Miranda and Julian arrived for a weekend, and I found them in Dad's study brazenly going through his private safe while he was sleeping fitfully upstairs. "What are you doing? Those are private legal documents." I shouted, my heart pounding against my ribs with a sense of impending doom. Julian didn't even look up, just flipped a page of the deed and said, "We're just preparing for the inevitable transition, Felicity. Someone has to make sure you haven't run this place into the ground with your quaint amateurish ideas." I felt the sting of their words like a physical whip, but I kept my mouth shut and my head down, remembering the silent, sacred promise I had made to Dad during those long nights. I watched them take advantage of Mother's grief-stricken and confused state, convincing her that the only way to save the family name was to sign over a general power of attorney to them. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they never noticed I was keeping a meticulous secret log of every dollar I spent to save the ranch, every hour of overtime I worked, and every conversation I had with the creditors to keep the bank at bay. Miranda's belief that everything was rightfully hers by birthright was so absolute that she never noticed the way the ranch hands looked at me with genuine respect, or the way Mr. Sterling, the family lawyer, would nod at me with a secret grim approval whenever we crossed paths. I was a ghost in my own home, a servant in my own heritage, but I was also the only one who truly knew the hidden value of the secrets Dad had whispered to me before the end. 3 months after my father was finally laid to rest in the cold, unforgiving Montana soil, Miranda decided that a massive, extravagant Christmas dinner was exactly what the family needed to rebrand and move forward. The ranch house was transformed into a grotesque neon-lit display of wealth that we didn't truly have, with celebrity caterers flown in from the city, and a guest list of people Dad would have never allowed past the front gate. I arrived that evening wearing the only nice dress I owned, hoping for a shred of family unity in our first holiday without him. But the moment I stepped inside, I realized the house had been stripped of his spirit. Miranda had replaced all the candid photos of Dad and me working the land with polished professional portraits of her and Julian, looking like some fake European royal couple. The dinner was planned for 20 people, all prominent developers and socialites, from Bozeman's newest elite circles, people Miranda wanted to impress before she made her big move to chop the land into subdivisions. When I entered the dining hall, my heart sank to see that there were exactly 20 chairs, and every single one was assigned to people who had never set foot on this ranch or asked about Dad's health while he was dying. "Where is my seat, Miranda?" "I thought this was a family dinner," I asked quietly, standing in the doorway while the room buzzed with the shallow chatter of people who didn't know the cost of the ground they stood on. She looked at me over her bare shoulder, her eyes cold, triumphant, and utterly devoid of sisterly love, as she adjusted a diamond necklace that I knew was bought with Dad's emergency funds. "Oh, Felicity, I didn't think you'd actually show up looking so weathered. We're out of space for guests of your type, but the dogs are being fed a very expensive meal in the mudroom, so you might find a scrap there." "If you're quick enough," she said, and her city friends erupted into cruel, muffled snickers. My mother Lydia didn't say a word to defend me. She just busied herself with the vintage wine, her silence acting as a sharp, final knife in my back. I looked around the room, seeing the naked greed in Julian's eyes as he showed a map of our pastures to a land developer, and the absolute, sickening disdain on my sister's face. It was the ultimate public betrayal, a calculated execution of my place in the family after I had sacrificed everything to save them from their own debts. That was the moment I realized my father's final secret instructions weren't just about the money, they were about a surgical, cold-blooded removal of the cancer that had infected our family tree. I felt a strange, icy peace wash over me as I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out that heavy silver box Dad had hidden in the floorboards. I didn't scream, I didn't beg for a chair, and I didn't cause a scene that would give them the satisfaction of calling me unstable. I walked straight to the center of that long, opulent table and set the silver box down with a heavy metallic thud that instantly silenced the room's laughter. "I'm leaving now, and I'm taking my dignity with me," I said, my voice projecting with a power that made Miranda flinch. "But since you all love a good show, make sure you look under your silk-lined plates once the dessert is served." My father had one last permanent gift for those he truly valued in this house. The silence that followed my departure must have been deafening, but I wasn't there to hear it. I was sitting in my truck watching the house through the falling snow, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Inside, as I would later learn from Mr. Sterling, who was seated at the far end of the table, the guests were confused, but the promise of a gift kept them in their seats through the final course. When the pumpkin cheesecake was finally served, Miranda, ever the seeker of attention, laughed and told everyone to play along with her little sister's dramatics. One by one, 20 pairs of hands reached under their fine china plates to find a thick, black-bordered envelope tucked into the silk tablecloth. As they opened them, the atmosphere in the room didn't just change, it disintegrated into a state of total shock. Inside wasn't a gift card or a memento, but a certified copy of the final codicil to my father's will, along with a printed transcript of a recording he made 2 weeks before he died. The document stated in cold legal terms that Garrett Vance had legally disinherited Miranda and Mother from the ranch and the primary estate due to demonstrated neglect and attempted financial exploitation. The entire ranch, the cattle, the brand, and the $7 million trust fund were left solely to me, Felicity Vance, with Mr. Sterling as the executor to ensure no contest could be made. But the real blow was the recording transcript where Dad's voice, even in its weakened state, described how he had watched Miranda and Julian try to sell the land while he was still breathing. He recounted the times I had stayed by his side while they were out at parties, and how I had used my own money to pay the ranch hands when they wouldn't. The guests, many of whom were the very developers Julian had been trying to court, looked at the couple with utter disgust. Miranda's face turned a ghostly, sickly white, and she began to scream that the documents were fakes, but Mr. Sterling stood up at the end of the table and cleared his throat. "I can assure you, Mrs. Vance, these are very real, and as of this moment you are trespassing on property that belongs entirely to your sister." He said, his voice as sharp as a Montana winter. The room erupted into chaos as people began to leave, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. Julian, seeing his dreams of a payday vanish, didn't even try to comfort his wife. He just stared at the paper in his hands, realizing that every cent he had spent on their extravagant lifestyle was now a debt he couldn't pay. The morning after the dinner, the ranch was eerily quiet, the festive decorations now looking like trash scattered across a battlefield. I walked into the house at 8:00 a.m. not as the forgotten daughter but as the owner, and I found Miranda and Mother sitting in the living room surrounded by half-packed suitcases and the wreckage of their pride. Miranda tried to fly into a rage the moment she saw me, her eyes bloodshot and her hair disheveled. "You manipulated him. You trapped him in that room with the lawyer and forced him to sign those papers. She shrieked, stepping toward me with her hand raised. I didn't flinch. I simply held up a manila folder containing the medical evaluation from Dr. Miller confirming Dad was of sound mind when the will was signed and a stack of bank statements. Actually, Miranda, what I have here is a record of every dollar you stole from Dad's accounts over the last 3 years, and a list of the unauthorized sales Julian tried to make. I said, my voice cold and steady. I'm not going to press charges for the fraud, but you have exactly 4 hours to get your things and leave this ranch. Mother Lydia started to sob, finally realizing that her enabling of Miranda had cost her everything. Felicity, please. I'm your mother. Where am I supposed to go? She begged, but for the first time I felt nothing but a dull pity. You can stay in the small guest cottage on the south end, provided you stay away from the main house and Miranda. I told her, but as for your golden child, she's on her own. Julian had already left in the middle of the night, taking the rented luxury car and leaving Miranda to face the consequences alone. It was a brutal reality for her, a woman who had never worked a day in her life now facing the fact that she had no money, no home, and a reputation that was charred beyond repair in the state of Montana. By noon, a moving truck arrived, and I watched from the porch as Miranda was forced to pack her designer clothes into cardboard boxes. She tried to curse me one last time, screaming that I would fail and the ranch would crumble. But the ranch hands, the men she had treated like dirt for years, just stood in a silent line and watched her go. There was no reconciliation, no tearful apology, and no sudden realization of sisterly love. There was only the sound of her car tires graveling away into the distance, leaving me with the land I had fought so hard to protect. 3 months have passed since that icy December night, and the spring thaw is finally beginning to bring life back to the Bozeman Valley. I stand on the high ridge of the north pasture looking down at the cattle grazing on the fresh green grass, and for the first time in my life, the air feels easy to breathe. The ranch is no longer a place of secrets and hushed conversations. It's a working heritage again, one where the people who do the work are the ones who are respected. I've started a conservation program to ensure this land can never be sold to developers, honoring the true spirit of what my father wanted for the Vance name. My mother stays in the cottage, a quiet, broken woman who finally spends her days gardening instead of social climbing, though we rarely speak more than a few polite words. Miranda is gone, living in a cramped apartment in a city she once looked down upon, sending me desperate emails that I delete without opening. People often ask me if I regret being so hard on my own blood, if the money was worth the family being destroyed. My answer is always the same: I didn't destroy the family. I simply stopped pretending that the rot didn't exist. This journey taught me that blood doesn't make you family, and silence doesn't make you a saint. If you stay in a toxic situation just because you're afraid of the fallout, you're only giving the fire more fuel. Justice isn't always about a loud explosion. Sometimes it's about the quiet strength of the person who stayed when everyone else ran away. Thank you so much for listening to my story until the very end. It means a lot to share these personal moments with you, and I truly hope it gave you some courage if you're facing your own battles with unfairness. If you've ever been treated like you didn't matter, just remember that your value isn't decided by people who don't see your worth. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect yourself from family? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video if